Most people do not lose money through failure. They lose it through patterns they never learned to see. The income arrives. The effort is real. And yet nothing accumulates. Solomon understood this long before modern finance had a name for it. He did not write about earning more. He wrote about guarding what sustains life. The gate that is left open does not need your permission to drain you. If this challenges you, stay until the end. There is a particular kind of financial discomfort that has no name. It is not poverty. It is not failure. It is not the result of poor decisions, at least, not the obvious kind. It is the quiet, persistent feeling that despite consistent income, despite showing up, despite doing what is expected, nothing is building. Nothing is accumulating. The number at the end of the month is nearly identical to the number at the beginning, and no one can explain why. This is not a rare experience. It is, in fact, the most common financial experience of disciplined, working individuals. People who earn regularly, people who are not reckless, people who, by most visible measures, are doing the right things, and yet nothing remains. That is the first thing worth sitting with. Not the solution, not the strategy. The observation itself. Because what disappears quietly is rarely questioned. We question what breaks loudly. We examine what fails dramatically. But slow, silent erosion, that passes without investigation. It simply continues. The dominant belief about financial instability is that it is an income problem. Earn more, and the instability resolves. Get a raise, find a better position, add a second source, and the discomfort disappears. This is the central assumption of modern financial thinking. More inflow equals more stability. It is a reasonable assumption. It is also, in most cases, incorrect. Consider the pattern that repeats itself without exception across income levels. A salaried worker earns a modest income. The ends barely meet. The solution, as advised, is to earn more. A promotion arrives. Income increases. And for a brief period, there is relief, a sense of room, space to breathe. But within several months, something shifts. The expanded income is met by expanded complexity. New subscriptions appear. Slightly better versions of ordinary things get purchased. The commute becomes more comfortable, but more costly. Dining choices shift upward. Nothing dramatic, nothing irresponsible. And yet, the savings figure at the end of the month remains nearly unchanged. The income grew, the stability did not. And the individual, confused, concludes, I need more income. The cycle begins again. If income solve instability, growth would feel permanent. But it does not feel permanent. It feels like a treadmill with a higher speed setting. The effort increases. The position stays the same. This is not an accident. It is a pattern. And patterns, unlike problems, cannot be solved. They can only be understood and redirected. There is a text that is thousands of years old, written during a period when wealth was not abstract. It was grain, water, land, livestock, tangible things with real exits, things that could be taken, consumed, or quietly lost. In that context, a king who was also a scholar wrote this: "Guard your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life." Proverbs 4:23. It is a spiritual instruction, yes, but read it again through the lens of resource management. Guard the source, because from the source, everything flows. If the source is unguarded, what flows from it cannot be controlled. And what cannot be controlled cannot be preserved. Ancient households understood this, not as philosophy, but as operational practice. Water wells were guarded. Grain stores were sealed. Access to resources was structured and deliberate. Nothing flowed freely. Not because of fear, but because of understanding. They understood that what leaves unchecked does not return. From a guarded well to a modern bank account, the principle has not changed. The form changes, the law does not. What was guarded survived. What was left open diminished slowly, quietly, without announcement. The ancient world did not treat preservation as secondary to acquisition. Preservation was primary. You protected what you had before you reached for more. This was not poverty thinking. This was the thinking of those who built lasting households across generations. Here is the assumption that must be broken clearly, because it is the foundation of most modern financial confusion. Wealth is not primarily built through inflow. It is preserved through controlled outflow. Read that again, not as motivation. As a structural observation, inflow is what arrives. Outflow is what leaves. And in most financial lives, outflow is largely unmanaged. It is habitual, automated, emotional, assumed. It runs quietly in the background, consistent and unquestioned, while all attention and energy is directed toward the inflow. This is the equivalent of filling a container with a hole at the bottom and concluding that the solution is a faster faucet. The container does not need a faster faucet. It needs the hole identified, examined, and sealed. Unnoticed expenses, when accumulated across 12 months, consistently outweighed deliberate savings efforts. Not because people spend carelessly on large things, but because small, repeated exits accumulate into significant loss that was never observed, never questioned, and never stopped. What you fail to stop, you eventually fund. Not through one dramatic decision, through 100 quiet ones, made automatically, without awareness. This is where the structure becomes visible. The ancient principle of guarding the source is not merely philosophical. It translates into a practical framework. A framework built not on motivation, but on architecture. On controlled exits, call it what it is, the iron gates. Each financial gate represents a category of outflow, not a budget line, a gate. A point through which money either passes with intention or passes without awareness. The difference between those two states is the entire foundation of financial preservation. When a gate is opened by default, when money flows through it simply because it has always flowed through it, that is not a decision. That is an absence of one. And the accumulation of unopened, unexamined gates is the precise mechanism behind the quiet financial erosion that no income increase can resolve. The iron gates are not tools you apply to money. They are the mindset through which you observe it. Every outflow becomes visible. Every recurring charge becomes a conscious choice, not assumed. Not automatic. Examined. Controlled. Either permitted or sealed. Wealth does not require more doors. It requires stronger gates. There are two kinds of people in any financial conversation, though they are rarely distinguished clearly. The first kind is focused on accumulation, on the inflow, on what can be earned, generated, attracted, or created. This is the dominant mode of financial thinking. More income, more sources, more opportunities. The second kind is focused on protection, on the outflow, on what is leaving, what is assumed, what is recurring, without awareness, and what remains after every exit has been examined. These two individuals can earn the same income. They can live in the same neighborhood, hold the same position, maintain the same lifestyle to outward observation. And after 10 years, their financial positions will be dramatically different. Not because one earned more, but because one operated as a gatekeeper and one did not. The accumulator believes that the solution is always forward, more effort, more input, more production. The protector understands that the structure must be sealed before the effort is meaningful. Those who protect first accumulate without urgency. Not because they earn more, because they lose less. And what is not lost does not need to be recovered. Which identity you carry into your financial life determines the result before a single income figure is relevant. The first gate is the one most people never examine. Recurring outflows. The exits that are not decisions. They are defaults, subscriptive scripts, services, established in a moment of convenience and never revisited. Automated payments that continue regardless of whether the underlying value still exists. These are not dramatic expenses. That is precisely why they function as leaks rather than as visible losses. A large, visible expense triggers examination. A small, recurring one does not. It simply continues. Month after month, year after year. The principle is this: anything that repeats without awareness becomes permanent leakage. Not because the amount is significant in isolation, but because the repetition, compounded across time, is invisible accumulation in reverse. A disciplined family, not necessarily a wealthy family, but a financially stable one, reviews its outflows regularly. Not to judge them, to see them. Visibility is the first act of control. You cannot seal a gate you have not located. What repeats, without awareness, escapes without resistance. This is not a moral statement. It is a mechanical one. The leak does not require your permission to continue. It only requires your inattention. When a structured review of a modern financial life is performed, not to fix it, but to simply observe it, what emerges is consistent. A typical monthly financial pattern contains between 8 and 14 recurring charges. Of these, the individual can immediately name 5 or 6. The remaining charges are discovered through examination, not memory. Each of these charges, in isolation, is small. None of them individually triggers concern. But aggregated across 12 months, they represent a figure that, had it remained, would have constituted meaningful preservation. The observation is not about cutting spending, it is about seeing clearly what is currently invisible. Clarity reveals what effort could not fix. Because effort applied to a system that is quietly leaking simply accelerates the loss. The leakage continues, regardless of how much is added, how hard the individual works, or how many income sources are created. The system must be seen before it can be structured. The structure must be sealed before scaling it produces results. Here is the insight that changes the frame entirely, though its full implications will become clear as this continues. Disciplined families, not extraordinary earners, not uniquely gifted individuals, but quietly stable households, share one operational behavior that distinguishes them from those who earn similarly but preserve less. They never allow passive outflows. Not as a rule imposed from outside, as an identity maintained from within. Every recurring charge is a conscious decision. Nothing continues automatically by default. Nothing is assumed to be acceptable simply because it has not been questioned. This is not extreme behavior. It is simply deliberate attention. What others accept without examination, they examine. What others allow by default, they require justification for. The gate is never assumed open. It is opened intentionally or it remains closed. What others accept, they examine. And that single behavioral difference, practiced silently over years, produces financial outcomes that appear, from the outside, to be the result of superior income. They are not. They are the result of superior structure. And that structure begins not with how much arrives, but with how carefully every exit is watched, examined, and controlled. There is a second gate, and it operates through a mechanism far less visible than recurring charges. It operates through something no spreadsheet can fully capture. That is where this must go next. The second gate does not open through habit, it opens through feeling. This is why it is the more dangerous of the two. Recurring outflows, once identified, can be reviewed, examined, and sealed through a simple act of structured attention. They are mechanical, they respond to observation. But the second gate responds to something else entirely. It responds to the internal state of the individual in a given moment. And because internal states shift constantly, because they are influenced by stress, by fatigue, by social pressure, by the quiet accumulation of a difficult week, this gate is the one that opens most frequently, costs the most over time, and is almost never recognized as the source of the loss. The principle here is precise. Emotion opens gates faster than logic can close them. Consider the structure of a typical spending decision made under emotional pressure. It is never framed as a financial decision in the moment. It is framed as relief, as reward, as a small correction for an uncomfortable feeling. A difficult morning at work becomes a slightly more expensive lunch. A week of sustained pressure becomes a weekend purchase that felt justified at the time and forgettable by the following month. None of these are catastrophic decisions. Individually, each one is entirely reasonable. A person enduring difficulty deserves small relief. That is not the question. The question is structural. How many times per month does this gate open? And what is the accumulated cost of those openings across a year? Across 5 years, what feels small in the moment becomes large in accumulation. Not through any single act of excess, through the quiet, consistent pattern of emotion-driven exits that are never examined because they were never felt as financial decisions at all. This is the hidden leva, and it is the center of everything. Two individuals, identical income, identical visible lifestyle, same neighborhood, same employer, same general expenditure on the things that can be observed. After 10 years, one has preserved significantly more than the other. The explanation is not income. It is not luck. It is not discipline, applied dramatically to large things. It is the quiet, consistent management of exits. The first individual allowed their gates to function as defaults, opened by habit, opened by emotion, opened by social expectation, and never systematically reviewed. The second individual operated as a gatekeeper. Every exit was either intentional or examined. The full iron gate structure, stated plainly, is this: no inflow, regardless of its size, produces lasting wealth if exits remain uncontrolled. Sealing precedes scaling. This is not a preference. It is the structural sequence that wealth preservation requires. To scale income before sealing exits is to increase the speed of loss, not the accumulation of stability. What remains defines wealth, not what arrives. What arrives is temporary until it is protected. And protection is not a passive condition. It is an active, structured practice applied quietly and consistently over time. The difficulty at this stage is rarely understanding. Most individuals, presented with this framework, recognize its validity immediately. The logic is clear. The structure is sound. The examples are familiar because they reflect lived experience. The difficulty is consistency. And consistency, in this context, is not a motivational challenge. It is a structural one. The system does not fail because the individual loses belief in it. It fails because attention drifts. Because the review that happened in the first month is skipped in the second. Because the gate that was consciously sealed in January is quietly reopened by March through a small automatic renewal that was overlooked. Structure fails only when attention fades. This is the discipline test, and it is entirely silent. No one will praise the individual who maintains it. No external metric confirms its success in the short term. The practice is internal, consistent, and unremarkable to anyone observing from the outside. That is precisely its nature. And that is precisely why so few maintain it beyond the initial period of motivated attention. The question is not whether the individual understands the iron gates. The question is whether they can observe without reacting, restrict without announcing, and maintain structure without requiring external confirmation that the structure is working. Those who can, do. Those who cannot, return to the income solution, and the cycle continues. There is a longer frame worth entering here. Wealth, when it is properly understood, is not a condition that is achieved at a specific income level or net worth figure. It is a slow accumulation of what remains after every exit has been managed. It compounds not through dramatic growth events, but through the quiet passage of time in which nothing leaks. Stability compounds when nothing erodes it. That is a different kind of mathematics than the one most financial conversations operate within. It is not the mathematics of growth rates and return percentages. It is the mathematics of preservation, of retained value, accumulating silently because there is no unmanaged exit through which it can escape. Short-term excitement, the promotion, the windfall, the unexpected income produces a brief expansion, but without a sealed structure beneath it, that expansion disperses into the existing pattern of outflows. The baseline does not shift. The excitement fades. And the individual is left once again at the familiar figure, wondering what happened to the moment of financial relief they experienced weeks or months earlier. Time rewards what remains intact, not what arrives and passes through. There is a social dimension to this that operates as its own gate, and it is worth naming clearly. Visible consumption is not wealth. It is the appearance of wealth. And the two are not only different, they are frequently opposed. The individual who displays financial confidence through visible purchasing is, in many cases, operating with less stability than the individual whose financial life is entirely invisible to outside observation. Disciplined individuals do not display their control, they practice it privately. The restraint is not performed, it is not announced. It generates no social response, no external recognition, no visible signal that anything is happening at all. And this is, in itself, a form of pressure. Social environments reward visible consumption and are indifferent to invisible preservation. The individual who declines a financial behavior that others in their environment are engaging in receives no reinforcement for that decision. There is no applause for the gate that stayed closed. Social pressure is a subtle and persistent force that opens gates. Not through confrontation, through quiet suggestion. Through the normalization of outflows that, examined individually, would not pass scrutiny. Through the ambient signal that what others do is what is acceptable. What is seen often costs more than it appears. Because what is seen is not only the cost of the thing purchased, it is the cost of the pattern it reinforces, and the gate it normalizes remaining open. This is the moment to address the idea of effort directly. There is a pervasive belief that financial improvement is a function of increased effort. Work harder, produce more, accelerate the pace, and the financial position will improve accordingly. This belief is not entirely without merit, but it is incomplete in a way that causes significant harm when applied without the structural foundation beneath it. More effort without sealed exits does not produce more wealth. It produces more flow, more inflow meeting more outflow, at a higher velocity, with the same net result. Speed without control leads nowhere. Or more precisely, it leads to the same place, faster, with greater expenditure of energy. The removal of urgency is not laziness. It is a structural recognition that the sequence matters. Restraint before expansion. Containment before scaling. Sealed gates before increased inflow. This is not the advice of someone who lacks ambition. It is the operational logic of those who build stability that persists across decades, rather than fluctuating with each income event. Effort directed into a sealed system compounds. Effort directed into an unsealed one disperses. The effort itself is not the variable, the structure receiving it is. When the identity fully forms, when the individual no longer sees outflows as defaults, but as decisions, something quiet shifts in the relationship with money. It is no longer reactive. Money is not something that triggers responses. It becomes something that is observed, watched, managed with the calm attention of someone who understands that every exit is a choice, and every choice either reinforces or undermines the structure. This is what it means to operate as a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper does not chase inflow with desperation. They do not respond to financial pressure with urgency. They observe the system, identify what is moving, and make deliberate decisions about what is permitted to pass and what is not. Control is not restriction, it is direction. Restriction implies limitation. Direction implies intention. The individual who manages their exits deliberately is not living a smaller financial life. They are living a more structured one. The difference is entirely internal, but the outcomes, compounded over time, are externally dramatic. Every outflow is a decision. Not a default, not an assumption, a decision. And the individual who inhabits that identity consistently does not need income events to feel financially stable. The stability is structural. It exists in the architecture of the system, not in the size of what arises. The practice that sustains this identity is not complex. It requires no specialized knowledge, no financial expertise, no external tool. It is a simple, silent, daily review. Not a correction, not a judgment. An observation, a brief, structured examination of what left, what is scheduled to leave, and whether each exit was intentional or assumed. This review does not require extended time. It requires consistent attention, and that attention, practiced daily, gradually shifts the relationship with outflow from automatic to conscious. What was once invisible becomes visible. What was once assumed becomes examined. What is seen daily is controlled naturally, not through force, through familiarity. The individual who observes their exits every day does not need to make dramatic interventions. Small adjustments happen quietly, consistently, without emotional resistance. Because the structure is maintained before it deteriorates, not repaired after it collapses. Those who have studied Proverbs with care will recognize that its financial wisdom is never urgent. It does not promise transformation through a single decision. It describes the slow, accumulated outcome of structural behavior practiced across time. Guard what sustains life. Control what flows from the source. Preserve before you expand. These are not motivational instructions, they are architectural ones. They describe how lasting households are built, how wealth survives transitions of income, of circumstance, of generation. Wealth does not remain where it is not respected. It does not build in structures that are left unsealed. It does not accumulate for those who attend only to what arrives and ignore what leaves. But where the exits are watched, where the gates are strong, where every outflow is either intentional or sealed, wealth does something quiet and powerful. It stays, and what stays, compounds. Not dramatically, not visibly, but consistently, and over time, irresistibly. The iron gates are not a strategy you apply once. They are a discipline you inhabit permanently. A mindset that reframes every financial moment, not as an opportunity to acquire, but as a responsibility to protect. Guard what leaves, and what remains will never require explanation. Those who guard what leaves will never question what remains. The iron gates rules seal every exit before expecting wealth to stay. What remains defines wealth, not what arrives. Guard your outflows. Guard your future.